I rented a room through a regular rental app. Nothing suspicious, until I found a voice recorder under the carpet, and on it a recording, "Don't go to the door at 4:44. Even if you hear me calling you in my own voice." The clock showed 4:41. My name is Alex Grayson. I'm a documentary filmmaker who captures stories about people, places, and memory. No mysticism, just facts, interviews, observation. I found myself in the small town of Milton, Indiana, on my way to my next shoot. I was looking for a place to spend the night. Everything nearby was either too expensive or didn't inspire confidence. The only place that looked decent was a room in a house owned by a man named Ellis. From the photos, it looked old but cozy. I booked it, arrived in the evening, and received the key. He greeted me with restraint but politeness. He mentioned that he usually doesn't rent out rooms, but after the last guest, I decided to make an exception. I didn't think much of it. Not then, anyway. The room was simple: a bed, a nightstand, a window overlooking a field. It smelled of wood and old books. I tossed my bag down, sat on the bed, and noticed something uneven under the carpet. I lifted it, a cassette recorder. It had a sticker, "Play only if necessary." Curiosity won out. I pressed play. The voice was mine. Absolutely mine. The timbre, intonation, even the way of speaking. Except, I had never made this recording. "Alex," the voice said, "you've rented this room for the 4th time already. But each time you forget. You already know what will happen at 4:44. This time, don't open the door. No matter what you hear." I stopped the recorder, listened to it twice more. The voice was definitely mine. I even checked my old recordings, a perfect match. I went downstairs to Ellis, tried to strike up a conversation, asked about previous tenants. He suddenly became very serious. He said that everyone who stayed here longer than one night woke up the same way. First the noise. Then the voice. Then the door. And then, it's as if they were never here. "But you're leaving in the morning, right?" I promised I would leave. But inside, everything had already tightened. I returned to the room, checked the walls, ceiling, windows, everything was in place. The clock showed 3:59. I tried not to sleep. I set up my camera to record, pointed it at the door. I turned off the light, sat on the bed, held the recorder in my hand. At 4:40, something clicked in the hallway. Like an old thermostat turning on. Then footsteps. Clear, slow, approaching. The camera was recording everything. At 4:43, I heard my voice. Exact. "Alex. I know you're not asleep. Just open up. It's important. Everything is not as you think." I didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard that I could barely hear anything except my own breathing. "I am you. Just one step further. You left this message for yourself. You were supposed to remember." 4:44, the footsteps stopped. The doorknob slowly turned. The door remained closed. Then, silence. Not a sound. I held out until morning. The camera battery died at the exact moment the voice began to speak. The recording cuts off precisely at 4 hours 43 minutes and 12 seconds. When I left, Ellis was waiting for me on the porch. He simply nodded. "You're the first who didn't open." I asked who the others were. He looked at the field behind the house. "There's nothing there. And that's the scariest part. Because they definitely went somewhere." I returned home. A day later, while unpacking my bag, I found a second cassette. I didn't put it there. It had a date on it. Today's date. And an inscription, "Next time, don't listen." The question, what if someone already knows how you'll act, and simply gives you the opportunity to choose when not to listen to yourself? I've never considered myself superstitious. As a documentarian, I deal in facts, tangible evidence, verifiable stories. The paranormal has no place in my work or my worldview. Until that night in Milton. The drive into town had been uneventful. Endless cornfields stretched on either side of the highway, occasionally broken by clusters of weathered barns and modest farmhouses. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, transforming the golden fields into a sea of amber and rust. In another context, I might have considered it beautiful. Today, it just felt isolating. I'd been on the road for nearly 6 hours when my GPS directed me off the interstate and onto a series of increasingly narrow roads. The last turn brought me to a gravel driveway leading to a 2-story Victorian house. It stood alone, surrounded by a sea of tall grass that swayed gently in the autumn breeze. The house itself wasn't in disrepair, exactly, but it had the tired look of a place that had once been grand and was now just surviving. Ellis Harper was a tall, lean man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at you. He wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt that hung loosely on his frame. When he opened the door, his expression was neither welcoming nor hostile, just watchful. "Mr. Grayson?" he asked, his voice carrying the slight twang common to this part of Indiana. "Yes. Alex Grayson," I confirmed, extending my hand. His grip was firm but brief. "You're earlier than I expected," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "The room's ready, though." The house's interior was a strange mixture of meticulous preservation and neglect. The entryway featured original hardwood floors that gleamed with polish, while water stains marked the ceiling corners. Family photographs lined the hallway walls, their frames dusty but the images well preserved, generations of similar-looking people with solemn expressions. "Been in your family long?" I asked, gesturing toward the photos. Ellis glanced at them as if seeing them for the first time. "Since it was built. 1897. He led me up a creaking staircase to the second floor, where a narrow hallway branched off into several doors. "Your room," he said, stopping at the last door on the right. He handed me an old brass key. "Bathrooms across the hall. Kitchen's downstairs if you need it. I don't provide meals, but help yourself to coffee in the morning." "Thanks. I'll be out early tomorrow anyway," I assured him, remembering his comment about guests who stayed longer than one night. He seemed to study me for a moment. "Why Milton?" he asked suddenly. "Not much happens here." I explained about my documentary project, a series on small-town historical societies and their role in preserving local memory. "Memory," he repeated, the word sounding strange in his mouth. "Interesting thing to document." He paused. "Well, good night, Mr. Grayson." After he left, I entered my room and took stock of my surroundings. The space was just as the listing had shown, a double bed with a patchwork quilt, a nightstand with a lamp, a small desk by the window, and a dresser against the far wall. The window overlooked what must have once been a garden but was now an extension of the wild field that surrounded the house. In the distance, I could make out a line of trees marking the property boundary. I set my equipment bag on the desk and my overnight bag on the bed. I was tired from the drive but also hungry, so I decided to head back into town for dinner before settling in for the night. As I moved my bag to unpack some toiletries, my foot caught on a raised edge of the carpet. That's when I found it. The cassette recorder. Looking at it now, sitting on the nightstand where I'd placed it after listening to the recording, I couldn't shake the chill that had settled over me. I picked it up again, turning it over in my hands. It was an old model, the kind that had been common in the 90s, a Sony with a slide mechanism for recording and a small red light that indicated when it was active. The label stuck to its side was handwritten in blue ink, the letters slightly faded but still clearly legible, "Play only if necessary." The rational part of my brain, the part that had guided my career and my life, was offering explanations. A prank by a previous guest. Ellis himself, perhaps, with some voice modulation software. Maybe even a weird promotional stunt for the town's historical society, though that seemed far-fetched. But none of these explanations accounted for the voice. My voice, down to the slight raspiness I get when I'm tired or stressed. The same cadence, the same slight New England accent that I've never quite shed despite years in the Midwest. I checked my watch, 4:22 p.m. If the recording was to be believed, I had 22 minutes until, whatever was supposed to happen. I grabbed my phone and called my production assistant, Mara. She answered on the third ring. "Hey boss, found something interesting in Milton?" she asked, the sound of traffic in the background suggesting she was on her way home from our office in Chicago. "Maybe," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Listen, I need you to do some quick research. Can you find out if there have been any strange occurrences in Milton? Specifically at 429 Willow Lane." "That's where you're staying?" she asked. I could hear her typing. "Give me a sec." While I waited, I paced the small room, checking and rechecking the windows and door. The window was old but secure, with a lock that worked. The door had a simple push-button lock in the knob, nothing fancy, but it would prevent someone from walking in unannounced. "Not finding anything specific to that address," Mara said after a minute. "Milton's pretty quiet overall. No major crimes reported in the last decade. There is a mention of some missing persons cases over the years, but nothing that stands out as unusual for a rural area. People leave small towns all the time. Any pattern to the disappearances?" "Not really. Different ages, genders. Span of years between them." "Why? What's going on?" I wasn't ready to tell her about the recording. It sounded too bizarre, too easily dismissible. "Just getting a weird vibe from the place," I said instead. "The owner made some cryptic comments." "You want me to come down there?" "I could be there by—" "No," I interrupted, perhaps too quickly. "No, it's fine. I'm just being paranoid. I'll head out first thing tomorrow." After hanging up, I checked my watch again, 4:35. 9 minutes left. I decided to confront Ellis. I needed more information before whatever was supposed to happen at 4:44 took place. I pocketed the recorder and headed downstairs. The house was eerily quiet. No TV sounds, no music, no kitchen noises. I called out as I descended the stairs. "Mr. Harper? Ellis?" No response. I checked the living room, the dining room, even peeked into what appeared to be a study. All empty. Finally, I tried the kitchen. There I found a note on the counter, "Had to run into town. Back by 6. Convenient, I thought. Too convenient. My watch showed 4:40. 4 minutes remained. I hurried back upstairs, suddenly very conscious of being alone in the house. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it, a click from down the hallway. Like a switch being flipped or, as the recording had suggested, an old thermostat turning on. I froze, straining to listen. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then came the footsteps. Just as the recording had described, clear, deliberate, approaching from the far end of the hallway. But that was impossible. I was alone in the house. I'd checked every room on my way to find Ellis. I backed into my room and closed the door, turning the lock with shaking fingers. I grabbed my camera from my equipment bag, a professional-grade Sony that I used for my documentaries. I powered it on and pointed it at the door, checking that it was recording properly. The red light blinked steadily. On my watch, 4:43. The footsteps stopped outside my door. Then, just as the recording had warned, I heard my own voice from the hallway. "Alex. I know you're not asleep. Just open up. It's important. Everything is not as you think." I couldn't breathe. The voice was perfect, my voice, speaking words I hadn't said. I pressed my back against the far wall, as if those extra feet of distance could provide protection. I am you. Just one step further. You left this message for yourself. You were supposed to remember. My watch ticked over to 4:44. The doorknob began to turn. I watched in horror as it rotated slowly, then stopped as it hit the locked position. There was a pause, and then, something I hadn't expected, a soft sigh. My sigh. The sound I make when I'm disappointed but not surprised. Then silence fell. Complete and absolute. I don't know how long I stood there, my back pressed against the wall, camera still recording, before I finally found the courage to move. I checked the footage. The camera had indeed captured the sound of the doorknob turning, but as the recording had predicted, the battery had died at precisely 4 hours 43 minutes and 12 seconds, just as the voice began to speak. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the desk chair, facing the door, a heavy paperweight from the desk clutched in my hand as a makeshift weapon. Outside, the moon rose and set, casting shifting shadows across the floor. When the first light of dawn filtered through the window, I packed my things. As I gathered my toiletries from the bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Dark circles underscored my eyes, and my skin had a sallow, unhealthy tint. I looked like someone who had seen something they couldn't explain away. Ellis was sitting on the front porch when I emerged from the house, a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked unsurprised to see me with all my bags, ready to leave. "You're the first who didn't open," he said simply. I set my bags down on the porch. "Who were the others?" Ellis gazed out at the field, where morning mist was beginning to burn away under the rising sun. "There's nothing there. And that's the scariest part. Because they definitely went somewhere." "How many?" I asked. 7. Over the years. And they all opened the door. He nodded. "Far as I can tell. I'd find their rooms empty in the morning. Beds not slept in. Belongings still there. Why don't you stop renting out the room?" I demanded, anger suddenly cutting through my fear. "If you know what happens." "I tried," he interrupted. "Locked it up for years after the first few. But they kept coming. Booking through different sites, giving different reasons. Always ending up in that room." He looked at me directly for the first time. "Always you." I felt as if the ground had shifted beneath my feet. "What do you mean, always me?" "Different names sometimes. Different jobs. But the same face. Same voice." He sipped his coffee. "I started to wonder if you were real. If any of this is." I wanted to dismiss him as crazy, but after what I'd experienced, I couldn't. "The recorder," I said. "Did you place it there?" He shook his head. "First time it appeared was after the third disappearance. I found it when I was cleaning the room. Played it, heard the warning. Since then, I've just left it. Figured whoever needed to find it would." I drove away from Milton in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Time loops. Parallel dimensions. Doppelgangers. None of it fit with my understanding of reality, yet I couldn't deny what I'd experienced. I spent the next day in a hotel in Indianapolis, reviewing the camera footage and the voice recording over and over. The footage showed nothing unusual until it cut out at 4 hours 43 minutes and 12 seconds. The audio on the recorder remained unnervingly clear, my voice, warning myself not to open the door. It wasn't until I was unpacking my bag the following evening, back in my apartment in Chicago, that I found it. A second cassette tape, tucked into the side pocket of my overnight bag. I hadn't put it there. I was certain of that. It bore today's date and 6 simple words: "Next time, don't listen." I've spent weeks analyzing both tapes, consulting with audio experts who confirm that the voice is indeed mine, with no signs of digital manipulation. I've researched Ellis Harper and his house, finding only mundane historical records, a property passed down through generations, unremarkable except for its longevity. I've even returned to Milton, parking across from 429 Willow Lane but never approaching the house. From my vantage point, I watched as different vehicles arrived and departed. Different people, or the same person, different versions. I couldn't tell from a distance. What I do know is this: I'm supposed to go back. The second tape makes that clear. And when I do, if I do, I'll have to choose which warning to heed. Don't open the door, or don't listen to the recording that tells me not to open the door. Sometimes I wake at night, certain that I can hear footsteps in my apartment hallway. And sometimes, in that space between sleeping and waking, I could swear I hear my own voice calling my name, asking to be let in. And I wonder, if I were to open that door, where would I go? And who, or what, would be left behind? Perhaps the most unsettling thought is this: whatever is happening in that room in Milton has happened before and will happen again. A loop that I'm caught in, even when I think I've escaped it. So here's the real question: when faced with a choice between two warnings from yourself, which do you trust? The one that tells you to keep the door closed, or the one that suggests you never should have heard the warning at all? I don't have the answer. But I suspect, someday soon, I'll find myself back in Milton, in that room, at 444, making the choice again. And maybe this time, I'll choose differently. Maybe this time, I'll open the door. After all, how can you truly fear what might be on the other side, when the real horror could be remaining trapped in a loop, forever making the same choice, forever leaving another version of yourself on the other side of that door? Perhaps the only way to break the cycle is to finally see what lies beyond. Or perhaps that's exactly what it wants me to think.